Habari gani, karibuni. I see my camera is blurry, so let's wipe that down. This is the thing when you're a black person and you use share butter, you touch your computer's camera and that's what happens. So there we go. That's much better. Karibuni, asanteni kwa kuwa nasi. Again, the name is Nduko. I am the host of Kumbukeni, an African woman telling the African narrative from an African perspective, countering the false narrative that Western media has propagated against Africa for too long, but also taking ownership of our narrative, taking ownership of who we are, and representing ourselves and saying no more to white people. Yes, and that is mostly who it is, representing us and telling our stories and twisting them. Today, I am going to be covering John Perkins. You know what? Let me get rid of my, because I will be showing the book virtual background. So yes, today I will be going through John Perkins' The Secret History of the American Empire, the truth about economic hitmen, jackals, and how to change the world. This comes after his book, Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He was an economic hitman. He was working side by side, hand in hand with jackals, CIA agents. That's who jackals are. He was working with multi-national corporations to take over nations and take over their economies. So he is speaking from first-hand experience, first-hand knowledge of what this is. So this is what we're going through. And as I was reading this book, we had John Perkins with us. And I thank him, by the way, today. I thank him for allowing us to go through this because I might read from it. So I figured let's ask whether we can do it before we get hit with any legal issues for using the information without the author's permission. So we do have the author's permission to go through this book today, and we're grateful for that. We had him, like I was saying, with us, myself and Brother Oladele, during one of our collaboration broadcasts to go through Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But as I was reading this, I was like, he goes much more in depth in this book, I think, goes much more in depth in this book about things he mentions in the Confessions of an Economic Hitman. For example, he mentions the CIA agent or a CIA sting that happens with the help of African nations in Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Here, he gives step-by-step details of that sting, who was involved, where it starts, how it goes, how they bring in the African nations, what happens. And so this is just a continuation of the Economic Hitman, but much more detailed, I think. So today I was going to start with go in order of the book when I first decided to do the book. But as I was reading, I said, no, let's start by centering Africa, but more so, let's start by centering this revolutionary African, Mwana Ubuntu, who's not talked about as often, because we want to honor him and the work that he did. And also because we want to show exactly how our people are part of the problem. I say this several times. Black people are in the way of Black liberation. Black people are in the way of Black liberation. Without the Black people who support the false notion of white supremacy, without the Black people who support neocolonialism, without the Black people who support the multinationals, without the Black people who support the CIA, who take the money from the CIA, we would have gotten our liberation a long time ago. If all of us were on the same page, if all of us, and for those who weren't, if we had a strategy to eliminate them, and yes, I did say eliminate them, because if they're causing harm to the community, they must be eliminated, all right? So if not for that, we would be liberated. We can complain about the white person, and rightfully so, but we also have to take responsibility for us still being exploited to this day and still being oppressed. And this is what is going on. So, and excuse me, my voice is a little rusty today because I am fighting a cold. We'll start with the history of African resistance against Predatory. This is in part 2, chapter 47. John Perkins gives us the story of Ken Saro-Wiwa. Ken Saro-Wiwa. To my Nigerian brothers, please forgive me if I did not pronounce that right. I'm just going to read a little part of this for understanding. This one I will read. So again, this is page 246 for those of you who will get the book, those of you who have the book, chapter 47, part 2. In Africa, the EHM failures are many. Therefore, assassinations have played a major role in the politics of that continent. Although most have been conducted in secret, some have taken the guise of legal executions. Perhaps the most famous in this category is that of Ken Saro-Wiwa. Saro-Wiwa was a Nigerian environmentalist and member of the Ogoni tribe who led the movement against the exploitation of his homeland by oil companies. In 1994, he was interviewed by Amy Goodman of Pacifica radio station WBAI New York. Ken Saro-Wiwa says, Shell, the oil company, decided they should keep an eye on me and watch wherever I go, follow me constantly to ensure that I do not embarrass Shell. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm a marked man. Early this year, on the 2nd of January to be precise, I was placed under house arrest with my entire family for 3 days. In order to stop a planned protest against Shell, 300,000 Ogoni people were going to move to protest the devastation of the environment by Shell and the other multinational oil companies. All they did was simply send the military authorities to my house. They disconnected my telephones, confiscated the handsets, and I was held for 3 days without food. Ken Saro-Wiwa was arrested again later that year and tried by the government of Sani Abacha, a pro-corporatocracy dictator, in what many observers described as a kangaroo court. On November 10, 1995, Ken Saro-Wiwa and 8 of his fellow environmentalists were hanged. The executed leader's son, Ken Wiwa, appeared on Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! Amy Goodman is now on Democracy Now! In 2005. Ken Wiwa, the son of Ken Saro-Wiwa, said, My father didn't bear grudges. It's not in the nature of my family or my community to bear grudges. We believe that Shell was part of the problem and must be part of the solution. We still feel that with some kind of dignity and a commitment to social justice, that the situation could still be salvaged. But it's been almost 10 years since my father was executed. Not a single member of the Nigerian military, which invaded Ogoni, conducted extrajudicial murders, raped young girls, women, all in the name of trying to suppress the protest of our organization so that oil could resume. Not one member of the military has been arrested. Assassinations, whether carried out by jackals like Jack Corbin or in the courts of dictatorial governments, have an enormous negative impact on social and environmental movements. The fear of arrest, torture, and death, and its effect on families and communities, has convinced many reformers to abandon their campaigns. The fact is certainly not lost on the corporatocracy. Today, as I write this sentence, Jack and other members of the Seychelles team applying. So Jack is the CIA agent. This will make sense when I go back to him. But just to get this, applying their trade in Iraq under the pretense of defending democracy. They conduct operations designed to protect the facilities of US corporations that are reaping windfall profits. Similar to EHMs, they work for private firms hired by the State Department, Pentagon, or through one of their accounts hidden among the blacklists of the intelligence community. According to their contracts, they provide security services and management consulting. So for me, every time I see Nsi Ya Ubuntu, an African, talk about they're a security specialist, security expert, I'm like, CIA agent. CIA, whether they know it or not, they're working for the CIA. Whether they know it or not, they're working for the United States government. As you see, Jack, former CIA agent, now a mercenary, is hired or contracted under the State Department. That is the government of the United States officially. But they have these covert organizations that are created to seem like it's private, but it isn't private. So the one thing I'm going to say before we get deeper into Ken Saro-Wiwa is no African, wherever you are on the globe, should ever think that the private sector of the West is separate from the government sector of the West or the military. All of them are tied in for the sake of empire building. They all have one purpose. And this is why I say it doesn't matter whether Trump what's her name again, Kamala. It doesn't matter whether it's Obama. It doesn't matter who sits as president of the United States, as long as this system works like it does to build empire. They will always do what empire wants done. So we have been, the one thing I noted as I was reading about Ken Saro-Wiwa was, we as Africans have believed this lie that Africans tend to betray their people. But we see time and time again, African leaders, African people who stand up for the well-being of their people. And we don't talk about that. That's not the forefront story that we put out. That should be the story that we put out. Not the betrayals. Yes, we must hold them accountable, but those Africans who have fought. Because to hold the betrayals before them is to dismiss them, is to desert them, is to not honor them. Let us hold up those Africans who stood up. So Africans have consistently resisted exploitation. Leaders like Ken Saro-Wiwa, as we saw, Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Samora Machel, and Muammar Gaddafi. And yes, Muammar Gaddafi was an African leader because he led the nation of Libya, despite the fact that he has Arabic or Arab ancestry. He was an African leader who actually understood that he was an African leader representing African nations as far as moving towards our liberation. So yes, we will be calling him an African today for that purpose. And they stood up against the West's exploitation of African resources, despite the fact that they knew they were targeted for death. They were going to be killed. They continued, they persisted, they resisted. These leaders were not traitors, they were revolutionaries who rejected selling out their nations to multinational corporations. So no matter what else they did, right, they were revolutionaries, and that's how we should hold them up as. Assassinations are the price of resistance. This is something we all know. Like I said, when I decided to start this work, I had to ask myself, am I ready to go to prison? Am I ready to die? And as selfish as that sounds for someone who's a mother, as selfish as that sounds for someone, this is me now using Western descriptions, right? Selfish. It is not selfish in any way when you think about it from the African perspective, because what I'm doing is thinking of the collective community. It is actually selfish. It is actually selfish for me to say I will not resist because of my children, because I am centering self. I'm centering my children despite what is happening to my community. So what is selfless is to say, I know this is going to be hard on my family, but if I don't stand up and resist, who do I expect to, right? If I don't stand up to resist, who do I expect to? And then if I don't stand up to resist, then I should stop complaining. I should stop lamenting about the videos of Congolese children and mothers and women being raped and killed because I am not willing to stand up and resist. And those are the only two options as far as that goes, right? We are in a world that wants grace. We are in a world that wants accommodation, meeting people where they are. No. When it comes to our lives and our well-being, there's two options. You either stand up and resist, or you stay comfortable but shut your mouth, do not complain about it, because this is those who are doing it knowingly. If you know what is happening in the world today, if you know what forces are fighting against us and what must be done, and then you choose, because you have children, because you have a family, to step back and not do something about it, you cannot complain. Honestly, you cannot complain about Trump, you cannot complain about Elon Musk, you cannot complain about any of it. When you open your mouth to complain, be ready to stand up and resist. At least don't complain to me, because that's what I'm going to say to you. Stand up and resist if you're feeling the pain. Otherwise, be quiet, go make your food, go hang out with your friends, and continue about business. Complain in your head, but don't complain to anyone else. So Western corporations and governments use dictators as puppets. We see Sani Abacha is used. Whatever perks they gave Sani Abacha, whether he was going to be given, and I'm going to be talking about something else also as we continue covering this information that might rub some people the wrong way, but this is the truth. And unfortunately, in our case as Wana Ubuntu, our truth is painful, right? It is going to reveal things that are hurtful, that will make you feel like you're being judged, but it is necessary for us to, again, my analogy, cross that Mara River that is infested with crocodiles to get to the other side where there's food and rain. So Sani Abacha convinced by the West. Again, they use these people, multinationals. We're talking about Shell. So Shell is the organization that is manipulating the politics of Nigeria, getting Sani Abacha to arrest Saro-Wiwa. We're not saying Sani Abacha is blameless, but we're saying this is what happens. And so they arrest Saro-Wiwa and execute him and his other teammates. And he was backed dictator serving multinational oil interests, right? Many African leaders who collaborate with imperialist powers are kept in power through military support. We have Museveni still in power. We have Kagame still in power. Kagame is held up by the West so much that some of us don't even know that he's a bad person. This is the ridiculousness, right? We have Ruto, always the scout who is invited to this place. And again, if you see your African leader schmoozing with the white folk and making them smile and laugh, know that that African leader has betrayed you. If you see your African leader in spaces with white folk and they look angry, know that that African leader is for you. This is just, and those of us who work in white spaces know this. We've seen it in our own situations where if you're the person, if you're the employee who just shuts up, does your work, comes in, gets your paychecks and goes home, you're invited to everything, right? If you're the employee who speaks up, I was that, you're not invited to stuff, including meetings. You're not invited for meetings. No one wants to be with you. Performance reports are written about you all the time. And in my case, you end up getting fired, right? Because they cannot stand you. They will not be comfortable around you if you're speaking resistance, if you're speaking liberation. So this is the one way to determine if your leader is for his people or her people or not. The fear tactic, and as John Perkins mentions, the corporations, the multinational corporations are very much aware of this tactic, the fact that fear works, and they finance it constantly. The instability that you see in Nsi Ya Ubuntu Afrika is because of them. So here goes the thing. If we know that multinationals are funding instability to create fear on our continent, why do we allow them on our continent, right? As I chop these up, as I break down these issues, I'm going to be asking these questions that are meant to start triggering solutions in your minds. Why do we allow multinationals on our motherland who are instigating and who are financing violence and instability? Right? By publicly executing Ken Saro-Wiwa, that was not a coincidence, and brutally repressing environmental and social movements, the Nigerian government, on behalf of Shell, sent a warning to all African activists: resist and you will die. That's what that is. If they're doing it publicly, it is to send a message to every one of you other revolutionary that this is the result of resistance. You're going to be killed. And you have people, and I saw this in the Kenyan protests recently, where because of the abductions, people have been discouraged. There's no more hope. People are not going on the streets because they're scared, and rightfully so. I get it, right? The same tactic was used against the Mau Mau revolutionaries, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army in Kenya, the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, and the liberation movements across Africa, right? They were Dedan Kimathi's pictures when he was arrested were everywhere. And they do that intentionally to show you that he is not as strong as you think. We have caught him. And if you think you're as strong as he is, you will end up in the same way. So we have to be resilient mentally, to not be tricked. I will use that word today, tricked by these images. We have to not sit and watch our revolutionaries, videos of them being arrested, tortured, and all that. Do not watch them. The only thing that is doing subconsciously is getting rid of your hope. So I suggest you don't watch them and keep it moving. So the takeaway from that is that the biggest lie imposed on Africa, for me, the takeaway was that the biggest lie imposed on Africa is that Africans always betray their own people. In reality, many African leaders have fought against Western imperialism only to be assassinated or overthrown by Western-backed forces. The second issue I wanted to touch on that is covered in the book is how the US and the UK use Africans against each other to maintain imperial control. This is in part 2, chapters 43 to 46. This is the story of Diego Garcia. And it's interesting, as I was reading this, excuse me. because Diego Garcia is recently in the news. This is the island off of Mauritius, off of the African continent, where its indigenous peoples were literally taken from their homes and moved to Mauritius and wherever else, so that the UK and now the United States could build a military base. Let me see if I can just read something that was outrageous, I guess we can call it, but no longer outrageous because we understand who these people are. All right. So Diego Garcia takeover is a prime example of how the US and UK manipulate African nations to serve Western military and economic interests. So what happens here is Mauritius was used to dispossess the island inhabitants. The British forced Mauritius to relinquish Diego Garcia, then falsely claimed the island was uninhabited. The part I want to read, if I find it, is where they are acknowledging that they know that there are people on the island, but they must build propaganda. They must build a narrative that says that there are no people so that they can inhabit the island, to justify leasing it to the US military. The island's inhabitants, mostly African descendants, were forcibly removed and left in poverty, while Mauritius leadership was rewarded for compliance. Again, another story where one African nation is betraying another African nation for the sake of Western interests. Seychelles was caught in the crossfire of Western interests. The US and UK backed Seychelles' first president, James Mancham, because he supported Diego Garcia's militarization and agreed to absorb displaced the island inhabitants. When Seychelles Prime Minister Franz Albert Rene, so the people of Seychelles are upset about James Mancham. They're upset that he is backing up the US and the UK about displacing the inhabitants of the island. And so they, Mancham is on official travel, and they take over. There's a coup that happens, and Franz Albert Rene takes over as the prime minister of the Seychelles. They overthrow Mancham in a coup, Western India. So all coups are not bad. Let's make that clear, especially when it comes to the African context. This is, and I've heard people who hear me say this and they criticize me. But in a case of Seychelles, you have a leader who's betraying you. The people are leading the coup, and they have chosen Franz Albert Rene to take over. We're talking about what? Burkina Faso and Traore. The people are leading the coup. The people are saying, we don't want this man who is supporting Western interests. And therefore, Franz Albert Rene takes over. Western intelligence agencies tried to assassinate him using African mercenaries. So the first, the US and the UK coordinate, and this is now where Jack, he's mentioned in the book, a former CIA agent who's now a mercenary, with a group of them are hired through South Africa. That is where they're staying. That's where they're training. They are training in Southern Africa. And if you read the book, all that information is here. Details about what groups they join, where in Southern Africa they are. But now it seems like Southern African people are the ones getting on. But no, these are US people who are now residing in Southern Africa and training as mercenaries. So they are recruited to go and assassinate Franz Albert Rene. And they go posing as an NGO. Again, the other reason why we should resist NGOs, we should stop supporting NGOs, and we should be careful who we are associating with. So they go as if they're going for an aid mission to the Seychelles, right? They go as if they're going for an aid mission, but the whole team is mercenaries who are going to assassinate the president, the prime minister of Seychelles, Franz Albert Rene. And the only way that coup attempt, or rather the assassination attempt, is stopped is because while they are at the airport in Seychelles, checking out and getting their luggage checked in customs, one of them had packed their bag carelessly, and his rifle was showing. So a shootout happens. There's shooting happening, and the airport is shut down. The president, the prime minister, Franz Albert Rene, had recruited Tanzanian soldiers had requested the support of Tanzanian soldiers, and they were there in the Seychelles. Now, this is the other side of Africa, right? When we support our own, they were there in the Seychelles protecting Franz Albert Rene, and they were known by these mercenaries. In the book, the mercenaries are talking about, they have the Tanzanian soldiers. We need to be careful because they're tough. They're great warriors, right? So they're the ones that help resist this. They're the ones who fight these mercenaries who are coming to assassinate Franz Albert Rene. And while this is all happening, there's an Air India flight that is trying to land at Seychelles. They don't know what's happening on the ground. It has not yet been relayed to them. All they see is that the lights on the tarmac are not on, but the mercenaries hear them trying to come in, and they turn on the lights, and they start acting as if they are the airport control staff. And they request, they ask them to come down, turn on the lights, and then they take over, they hijack the flight, and this is how they get back to South Africa. In the middle of all this, Kenyan soldiers are hired by the US through all these other factions, and they're used to give the coup an African face. So the goal is, when all is said and done, once they have killed Franz Albert Rene, there will be Kenyan soldiers fighting the Tanzania soldiers, and it will look like it is an African fight, while all along in the background, it is a US-driven war, a US-driven assassination. So this is what's happened. And I made note, this is in 1970. That is Jomo Kenyatta, who was president in Kenya at the time. For those of you who, and this is my brothers and sisters in the United States, who are naming your children Jomo Kenyatta. I have had the fortune of meeting some of you now and telling you that Jomo Kenyatta is not a hero to us, right? Some Kenyans might still think he is, but he's not a hero to us. Jomo Kenyatta betrayed the Kenyan Land and Freedom Army. And we see him in this case continuing his betrayal tactics, right? He gives Kenyan soldiers to go assist in this assassination, knowingly so. So from this day on, if you did not know that Jomo Kenyatta is not a revolutionary. He may have been at one point, but he is a betrayer before he is a revolutionary, because he did betray his people. So again, stop naming your children Jomo Kenyatta. You might be putting on them the curse of betrayal. So a South African-backed US mercenary team, they attempted, like I said, to overthrow Rene, planning to frame Kenyan troops as the ones leading the coup to make it appear African-led. The Kenyan government was aware of this. This is a classic divide and conquer strategy, using African forces to fight African governments on behalf of Western powers. Why do they accept this? Because the president of Kenya is paid, because the president of Kenya is promised that his children will have access to Ivy League schools. And this is what I was going to mention. We have a lot of dignitary children who have gone to Ivy League schools. I'm going to be kind today and not mention names. But you'll hear of children whose parents are politicians. You know them, Kenyans who are out there, who've gone to Yale, Harvard, and all kinds of things. One of the ways, possibly a high possibility of how they got there, is because their parents was a part of assisting in the expansion of the US empire, in whichever way, and betraying their people. So these are the realities that we need to start confronting. And when you have a situation like that, and you see this person is famous, and you're wondering why they're not speaking up against certain issues, why would they speak up against certain issues? Why? Their luxurious lifestyle has been afforded by betrayal to our people, whether they know it or not. But they are nurtured by parents who have the spirit of betrayal, who have taught them everything but standing up for their people. So these are the things that we need to stop being surprised by. So South Africa took the blame for this attempted assassination, while the US and UK avoided scrutiny. The mercenaries were quietly released. Like I said, they took the Air India flight to South Africa. Some of them were arrested. One of them was executed. And if you notice in the book, those tied to the US were quietly released, and Western governments distanced themselves from the operation. Rene, once defiant, was forced to become cooperative. So what happens to Rene is fear works in this case as far as the Prime Minister of Seychelles. He sees the attempted coup. He is afraid for his life. he is forced to become more cooperative, securing Diego Garcia military base continued existence. Today, it is still under US ownership. And I do want to find where this is quickly, because there's a very, it's important that we understand why the United States wants that geographical location. Just bear with me, please. Bear with me. There's so much in the book that I will not be able to cover it in the 1 hour, 15 minutes today, because I am running to the source of knowledge to read. Today they're starting their 100 days of Malcolm X. So I'm going to run there to read, and we'll only be here for an hour, 15 minutes. But there is so much to cover in the book. And I may do a second part to this. We'll see what happens. Let me know if you want me to do a second part to this. But I do want to read exactly why the United States wanted that location and why they want it, what it means to them. Here. All right. And this is a long one. Politicians jumped on the bandwagon. Social programs were sidetracked. This is now United States politicians. Money diverted to the Pentagon. The decision was made to build a fortress, a nuclear warhead-equipped airbase, an Al-Dabra Island off Africa's east coast. It would reinforce Simonstown, the Southern African naval installation near the Cape of Good Hope. Jack explained. Jack is the former CIA agent. American nuclear subs used Simons, far away from prying eyes, to refit before returning to their long, lonely patrols in the South Atlantic and Indian Oceans. An airbase north of Madagascar was the perfect complement to Simons. However, once the project began to take form, planners discovered that Aldabra was the breeding ground for rare giant tortoises. Fearing adverse publicity from a growing ecological movement, Washington redirected its efforts to nearby Diego Garcia. So sometimes we have to stop and pause, because a message is being given to us in this sentence, and we're not even seeing it. So these white folk decide that Aldabra is not a good island to take over for their military base because they are tortoises. But they decide that Diego is a good one that has human beings. And here goes the white man's delusion and insanity and psychopathy. They value the tortoises' lives more than they value our Ubuntu, Black person's humanity. That sentence there indicates that. Whether you agree or not, that's what that indicates. Because there's an island, they decide, oh, we're not going to be on this island, environmentalists, whatever, tortoise. The tortoise is there. But guess what? Diego Garcia has some human beings. We're going to put out propaganda that there were no human beings. We're going to move them. We're going to displace them. We're going to oppress them. That's okay. Right? And it shows you that they value the animal's life more than they value our humanity, which says much, much more about how they see us. And we should know how to act when these truths are revealed to us, and how to see them as far as our liberation and our well-being. Once you know better, you must do better. Again, I was one who didn't know better and was just going along to get along, just living life mindlessly. But now that I know better, you cannot take me back to that. And no matter what you say, no matter how much you criticize me, you cannot take me back to that, going along to get along. So, however, once the project began to take form, planners discovered, well, although there were no endangered turtles on Diego Garcia, 1,800 people lived there, mostly descendants of African slaves. And that is the sense of humor that and sarcasm and what we call it, satire, that John Perkins uses, right? Although there were no endangered turtles on Diego Garcia, 1,800 people lived there, mostly descendants of African slaves. It was unacceptable, Jack told me, to have any people inhabiting an atoll slated to become a state-of-the-art US military base. In a 1970 deal brokered by EHMs and involving US and British intelligence agents, London forced Diego Garcia's residents to abandon their homes. Every attempt was made to maintain secrecy. According to the BBC, British politicians, open quote, British politicians, diplomats, and civil servants began a campaign, in their own words, to maintain the pretense there were no permanent inhabitants on the islands. This was vital because proper residents would have to be recognized as people, whose democratic rights have to be safeguarded. The inhabitants therefore became non-people. You see that? Worse than a tortoise, they became non-people. End quote. Many of the islanders were hustled across the water to neighboring Seychelles. England then leased an uninhabited Diego Garcia to the US government. Again, this is why when we confront these people today and they talk about, I'm not innocent, I'm not to blame for my ancestors' crimes, you're like, nah. Mm-mm. We cannot tolerate that because the way you got this was wrong. So we have to stand by the original crime. We have to, if we're going to correct these wrongs. England then leased an uninhabited Diego Garcia, and John Perkins has it in quotes, uninhabited Diego Garcia to the US government. In exchange, Washington offered the British an $11 million subsidy on Polaris submarine technology. The lives of island inhabitants and their homes had been valued at about $600 a person. The Pentagon rushed ahead to build its military base, developed to house B-52s, and later the radar-evading B-2 stealth heavy bombers. There's a reason I'm reading this. I don't care if we don't cover anything else and I read just this. This is important. It would play a key role in US empire building, serving as a staging site for forays into the Middle East, India, and Afghanistan, as well as Africa. Despite its strategic importance, Diego Garcia remained low profile, a relatively unknown US presence off the coast of Africa. In the chat, please, for those of you on Twitter and those of you with us on YouTube, those of you on LinkedIn, let me know now if this is the first time you're hearing about Diego Garcia. If this is the first time you're hearing about this story, just type first time. Let me know. There's nothing wrong with it, right? Do not feel ashamed. Do not feel embarrassed. Just let me know because we're trying to show how propaganda works, right? And in learning how it works, in learning how it has affected us, we're better able to build strategies, to build systems that can counter it. So if you are just finding out about Diego Garcia, in the chat, just write finding out now, or just found out, or whichever way you can let me know. Asante, wild from the point. Again, this is intentionally done. Despite its strategic importance, Diego Garcia remained low profile, a relatively unknown US presence off the coast of Africa. Few people, very few Africans are aware of this. Few people are aware that protecting it was justification for one of the most blatant assassination attempts ever undertaken by CIA-sponsored jackals. That's the one I just spoke of, with the Seychelles participating and Kenya, and Tanzania standing in support of the people of the Seychelles. James Mansham had been elected the Seychelles' first president after independence was declared on June 29, 1976. His primary contact with Washington and London was by way of South Africa, a staunch corporatocracy ally. When you hear South Africa, do not think Mwana Ubuntu. Do not see a black person. When you hear South Africa, think of the white minority that is controlling that government. That is who we're talking about. Through the South Africans, Mansham made it clear that he supported the Diego Garcia deal. He offered the quiet, well, I've told you this story, but the point, the point is the United States is taking this island, knowing very well that it's a strategic positioning geographically to control Africa. I have put, for those of you who follow me on Twitter, for those of you who follow me on Instagram, I posted a few posts earlier this week, one of them stating that John is in the room with one of his bosses, and the bosses say, if you're planning to have children and you want a good future for them, you must understand that control of Africa is very important for the United States. Control of Africa. They say we need the Middle East but we must have Africa. And Kenya is mentioned as one of the nations that are strategic to this goal. For those of you who hear Kenya being mentioned now as the best economy, Kenya is our partner, Kenya is this, there's a reason. And the reason is not to help our continent. The reason is not to help Kenyans, that Kenya is upheld. And we must understand this, and we must resist. I am not on Kumbukeni talking about this book just for the sake of it. I'm not on Kumbukeni talking about this book and what transpires in it to get followers and to get subscribers. No. It takes a lot for me to read these books and prepare for Sunday and to put out the shows that we do. I honestly would like to have the luxury of not having to do that, but I cannot afford that. Like I said again, once you know better, you have to do better. I have to resist, and this is one way I'm resisting. But the reason for me to put this out is for you to be inspired by it, to resist. I'm not even going to mince my words about this. And now I'm going to quickly go to solutions because it's 12:42. I'll cover one more and then we'll go to solutions because that's the most important part of this. I am doing this. I am not afraid. I'm not worried about the CIA who might be watching this. I'm not worried about the FBI who might be watching this. I'm not worried about the United States. I'm not worried about whoever else, Elon Musk, who will want to cancel our channel when I do this. I am worried about how much it's going to reach, how many people it's going to reach, how many Wana Ubuntu it's going to reach, how many of them will be inspired to resist. That's my concern. So if you know someone who has that resistance spirit, send them this video. We need, again, I've said this, I'm not in the business of secrecy. I'm not in the business of pretending like I don't want the empire to fall. No, I'm not. I don't know why we pretend. I don't know why we are secretive about it. It is plain and simple. You oppress us, we're the oppressed. We want you to fall. I don't know why that needs to be secret. I don't know why you should be worried about them calling you a terrorist because you want them to fall. I don't see why you should be worried about that. You are terrorizing them. You're terrorizing their existence. So own it. Own it proudly. I want to terrorize empire to the point where it falls to its knees so that we can be liberated. That's the goal. And and I've said this several times, I'm reading you stories of people who are taken out, knowing very well that that could be my fate. And my request to you all, I plead with you all that if I face the same fate as our brothers and sisters that came before me, you must continue. We must stop giving up. So, Diego Garcia still exists. The United States is in control of it. It is an island off of Nsi Ya Ubuntu that has great access to Asia, Africa, for them to do whatever they want. And as you heard, it is nuclear equipped, right? So they can attack us from there. And when we talk about solutions, you hear some of them, right? And this is us reaching out again. You have Africans who reach out to me and say, why are you talking about solutions on public on a public platform? I'm talking about solutions on a public platform because this public platform can reach more Wana Ubuntu than I can personally. Right now, I cannot travel, right? I can, but I don't have the luxury of traveling to as many places as I need to reach Wana Ubuntu in a short time. But this video has the capability of reaching thousands, millions, with the help of the followers that we have, millions of Wana Ubuntu globally in seconds. And that is why I give solutions on public platform, on a public platform where our enemies might hear our solutions. But guess what? They don't have to know how we go about them. They don't have to know when we start putting together the solutions. They don't have to know who's doing it. They don't have to know the details of it. But I don't care if they know that this is what we are planning to do and the solutions that we take on. Because what I care about most is that my people know these solutions and they start acting, they start being inspired, they start resisting. And for that reason is why I put out these solutions on public platforms. So I'll quickly go. We've talked about this before. And as I go through this, I'm sometimes I step back and I say, I'm talking about the World Bank and IMF again. Should I do that? And we've done this, those of us who cover these narratives, the African media outlets out there, like Kumbukeni, where we're like, okay, I've covered that topic. I won't cover it again. No, we have to cover it again and again, and again. This is counter propaganda. That's the strategy. It has to be repeated over and over and over and over again. So here comes the World Bank and IMF as tools of economic imperialism. Again, this is in the prologue. He mentions this in the prologue. John Perkins exposes the World Bank and IMF as instruments of US economic domination, rather than global institutions meant to help developing nations. He also mentions US aid. US aid is mentioned here because I've been seeing a lot of Africans lamenting. And to you, oh my God, Larry Mado, I'm not doing this as a personal attack. I'm just saying, please, as you continue to work for the CNN, be aware what you're representing and how it's affecting the liberation movement, how you could be countering the liberation movement by putting out CNN's videos. And I'm specifically talking about USAID. I have seen Africans lamenting about Donald Trump putting USAID on temporary hold and what they're doing and what they're funding. The US aid is a cover operation. It's a cover organization for the CIA, for the United States empire expansion. It is not there to give aid. Again, if I remember the acronym, and the name is right there, right? These people are geniuses. One thing I found out working with them is they love acronyms. And what this acronym does is covers the true intention of what US aid is. You see US aid, it is famously known as USAID. All over the world, it is not known as the United States Agency for International Development, which is what USAID stands for. Africans don't know it for that. They don't know that this is the United States Agency for International Development, aka the United States Agency for International Empire Expansion. That is what international development means, for those of you who don't understand that language. So the USAID is the United States Agency for Empire Expansion internationally. So those Africans who are crying because you've lost your jobs, wipe your tears, and go and start. And now at least you can relate to your fellow Africans who are struggling, right? Now at least you can relate. Now maybe you will show up for the protests, or you will start showing up for the different activities that are needed to reclaim Kenya. This is Kenyans I've seen a lot lamenting about the USAID and the many people who've lost their jobs. I am okay with you losing your job if you're working for these organizations. I'm very much okay with that. 100% okay with that. I'm sorry that you're going to have to suffer the consequences of losing a job, but I am okay with Nsi Ya Ubuntu losing jobs. In fact, I'm asking you to be prepared because that is where we're going. We don't want these multinationals on our motherland. So you will be losing your jobs. But for the sake of our liberation, I think that's a small price to pay. So be gone with US aid. Stop shedding the tears for USAs. You might confuse our ancestors. Again, they're here to guide us. So here they are helping us. They take away, they bring Trump, if it is them who have brought him for whatever crazy agenda that they have, right? He might be the disruptor that we need to awaken and liberate ourselves. And in his craziness, he takes away USAID, and then we are crying. Instead of being grateful that it is gone and we at least have some room to start doing some things ourselves without the eyes of the white man, right? So this system was designed at Bretton Woods, the World Bank and IMF. Those of you who've watched Kumbukeni over and over again, you've heard us talk about Bretton Woods in 1944. And it was not just about post-war reconstruction, but also about providing the superiority of capitalism over communism. So they're fighting the boogeyman, communism, and they're building capitalism. But they have to send the propaganda that capitalism is good. It's better than communism. This mission led to an alliance between these institutions and multinational corporations. So the World Bank is there to support multinational corporations. The IMF is there to support multinational corporations first before they support you, if they're supporting you at all. So allowing economic hitmen to orchestrate multinational, multi-trillion-dollar scam that trapped nations in debt. So this is how the scam works. They target resource-rich countries, developing nations with valuable resources. You all know Congo is like on top of that list. They identify them, oil, minerals. Like I mentioned in the post that I put out this week, John Perkins' boss says to him, we need the Middle East, but we must have Africa. And he mentions all the reasons why. And he gives nations that are strategic points for their empire expansion. So once they identify these nations, they give massive loans for infrastructure. The World Bank and IMF provide enormous loans, supposedly for development projects like power plants, airports, and industrial parks. In the meantime, they know that these loans you'll not be able to pay them. So the money from these loans is funneled to Western corporations. So the money never even gets to your nation. And if it does, it's getting to the politicians. The funds primarily benefit US and European engineering and construction firms, not the local economy. Because part of getting the loan is that you take on a European firm to do the development project. Just like the Chinese, do not think that the Chinese are operating differently. Just like the Chinese, when they decide that they're going to build that railway in your country, you have to hire their company to do the building. You have to hire their company to do the driving. Most of the drivers are Chinese on the railway, the trains in Kenya. And so the money is going back to them. For those of you who think Africa has debt, the money is going back to them from GET. The money is going back to the nation that lent it. And so now you're in a debt trap and political control is taking over. Once these nations are unable to repay their debts, they are forced to surrender their resources. That's the collateral that you have accepted. That's the collateral that Ruto accepts when he signs that document saying, we're going to give you a loan. If you don't pay this loan, we're going to have access to such and such. We're going to have, or you're going to sell Kenya Airways, Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. You're going to sell this plant, power plant. These are the things. So they take your resources, voting in favor of US interests at the UN. So every time you as a Mwana Ubuntu hear that your country has voted in favor for something that the US is aligned with, and you sit there and ask, why did they do it? They had agreed on it way back when they have accepted some certain loan. This is part of it. Or sending troops, listen to this one, sending troops to support US military interventions. What is happening now in Haiti? Who is there fighting the US war in Haiti? Kenyan soldiers. How did that happen? Because probably somewhere down the line, Kenya accepted a loan. The IMF, the World Bank had this tied to it. If you're not able to pay this loan, you will need to send troops to such and such place. You will need to assist with such and such thing. And they signed it because in addition to that, they're being promised money, these leaders. They're being promised, like I said, for their children to go to Ivy League schools and have access to companies where they can get jobs after they're done with school. So what implications does this have to our continent? Many African nations fall victim to this scheme, leading to crippling debt, economic dependency, and loss of sovereignty. Again, the one Bible. Put down the white man's Bible. Put down King James and pick up How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. That is the Bible that you should be walking with. That is the Bible that you should be reciting. Like if I come to you and I say something to you and you want to be that Christian who sends me Matthew chapter this and that. No, send me How Europe Underdeveloped Africa chapter this and that, line this and that, page that and that. I will respect you forever. The so-called development projects did not benefit the poor. Power plants were built, but people remained without electricity. In Kenya, we have a power plant. How many of you have electricity 24/7? Ask yourself that. We have airports. We have the airport in Kenya now, in Nairobi, one of them, that is run down. You have water leaking from the ceilings. What is happening to the money that was given for that development? Right? How many of us Kenyans have access to the airport? How many Kenyans have access to the airport? Is that more important than us having access to food, having access to agricultural land that impacts everyone's well-being? So you have African leaders who resisted, like, again, we mentioned before, Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Muammar Gaddafi, several people who have resisted, and that is who we should put in the forefront. That is the story that we should put forward. Yes, exactly. Kenya's fate is all of our fate. Again, no one African nation is going to suffer the fate of imperialism without the others feeling it. For those of you who think that you're nationalists and you can survive beyond another African nation, wake up. As I told you, John Perkins' boss said to him they want access to all of Africa. Egypt was the gateway, but they wanted access to all of Africa. So it's not just one country. And they describe it as, once we get Egypt, all the others will fall in a pile like dominoes. It's like a game to them. So the World Bank and the IMF do not serve global development. They serve US economic and political interests. And you will see this if you see how their staffing is structured. Mostly, the US controls 17% of World Bank and IMF policies. The head of the IMF and World Bank, I believe both of them, is selected by the United States president. That is the joke that we all are falling for and not realizing how much we've been duped. Trump is going to be selecting the head of the World Bank and IMF if he doesn't like the one that was already there. And they're calling themselves a World Bank, and we have believed that they are a World Bank. No. African nations must reject predatory loans, reclaim their resources, and establish independent financial institutions. I'm going to go ahead to solutions. Get the book. Don't sweat about the fact that you're supporting a white man, who John Perkins is. Get focused on the fact that you're getting information. That is why you're getting the book. Everything else doesn't matter. You're getting information that you can share with others. You're getting information that's going to equip you to make informed decisions as far as our liberation. So that's why you're getting the book. And if you have the money to get the book for someone else, get the book for someone else, because this is an essential book in us understanding imperialism and the expansion of empire and the strategies that they use and the different strategies that they've already put in place that we need to know about, that we must counter and we must take down. So solutions, because that's what we are about. We're not here to just talk about the problems. We talk about the problems so that we can understand them, so that we can put together solutions in an informed way. So Western imperialist forces have historically neutralized African revolutionaries through assassinations, economic sabotage, military interventions, intelligence operations, media manipulation, and now digital warfare. Again, the fact that what's the company that Elon Musk has now, Starlink, is everywhere in Africa should not be a source of comfort. It should be very worrying for us that Starlink is the source of internet that is relied on right now in Nsi Ya Ubuntu. If Africa is to secure its revolutionary leadership and dismantle neocolonial control, it must develop a multi-layered defense strategy that counters every single threat posed by imperialist forces. So Ruto must go by itself is not enough. No. And this is what I was telling my fellow Kenyan brothers and sisters. You have to understand what the root cause of the problem is, and then figure out strategies to counter and destroy that root cause of the problems. Number one, intelligence and counter surveillance strategy. I've said this all the time. If you're being surveilled, you must build a counter surveillance strategy, system. Western intelligence agencies, CIA, MI6, Mossad, private firms, name them, all of them, they use technology to track and eliminate African leaders, right? Nkrumah was able to find this out when he was running Ghana. He found out that he was being spied on by the CIA through headphones that they had sold them. They didn't know they were sold, those headphones were sold by the CIA because they were sold by a company that appeared to be private and separate from government entities. But in the meantime, it was a cover organization for the CIA. And the CIA had planted bugs in those headphones and they were being spied on, right? Same thing with the AU. the headphones they were using there. So train counterintelligence teams across Africa to detect, intercept, and neutralize threats from foreign intelligence agencies. We must do that. Develop Africa's own surveillance tech to monitor foreign operatives, mercenaries, and local collaborators working against African interests. Establish secure underground networks for revolutionary leaders to operate outside of Western-controlled communication systems. Use decentralized encrypted communication like open-source blockchain-based messaging apps to counter NSA surveillance. NSA surveilling you even on the continent. Employ AI-powered cyber defense systems to counter hacking and digital infiltration. We should have a team of hackers 5 times the size of the team of hackers that they have. This is what we should have. And because we're in a position where we're not economically liberated, we should understand that at the beginning, this might have to be a voluntary exercise for those of us who have these skills. You as a hacker, you as someone who's trained as a hacker, reach out to the revolutionaries who are structured well, who are doing the work, and say, hey, I want to offer my services in doing such and such a thing. And your reward will be ultimate at the end of it, when we are all liberated, when we are all building our economies. I think that's a reward that is worthy volunteering for the work that is needed for our liberation. Number 2, digital warfare and AI countermeasures. The West uses social media, artificial intelligence, and misinformation campaigns to assassinate the character of African revolutionaries. You have African, what are they called? Oh, goodness, I forget the name. African Press. The channel that was the African media outlet that was African Stream, that was recently maligned by the US Secretary of State. Something like that happens, we all come out and support. We all come out and shut down the US Secretary of State. I would like to see it get to the point where something like that happens, the nations of Africa, of Nsi Ya Ubuntu, block the US from entering. You do that, you, US Secretary of State, cannot come to Africa anymore. And you guess what? We're closing all your accounts on our continent. Your nations, your multinational organizations cannot operate anymore until you reinstall this African media outlets access to whatever it is that you've taken away. That's how we need to start moving. Deploy AI-driven misinformation detectors, create African-owned social media platforms, use blockchain. I'm happy to see that there are a bunch of them coming up. Use blockchain technology to secure revolutionary communications and prevent hacking from foreign intelligence. Develop quantum encryption protocols. Some of this I'm saying it's like, shoo, even over my own head. But we have those experts in our communities who understand what we're talking about. Counter digital assassinations by flooding the internet with pro-revolutionary content. I am not worried about seeing multiple African media outlets showing up on YouTube. I want even more. I want them to be so many that YouTube does not even know what to do with them. So if you're an African who's thinking of doing this, you have a computer that has a mic and we can see you, get started. Get started with your channel. Don't worry about the subscribers. Don't worry about, reach out to people like me. I'll bring you as a guest so that we can push your channel and grow it. Get started. We want as many of us out there so that we can shut down these people. We can take them down. The goal is to bring them to their knees. Military and physical protection strategy. African revolutionaries have been assassinated through military coups, drone strikes, poison, and infiltration. Those of you who've watched Black Hawk Down, that was a small area of Somalia, but they were able to take down those Black Hawks because they worked together. They used what they had to resist. I know I'm going to get criticism, oh, you're supporting Black Hawk Down and all that. Listen, I am understanding the world in a very different way today. You're the oppressor, I'm the oppressed. You're oppressing me, I have the right to stand up against you. You call me terrorist, well and good. I am terrorizing you because I need you to stop oppressing me. I am not making apologies for that. African revolutionaries have been assassinated through military coups, drone strikes, poison, again, like we said. They had planted, they don't get Lumumba this way, but the first attempt on his life was through toothpaste. They had put poison in his toothpaste. That did not work out, or they thought that wasn't a good idea, so they went for the alternative. The solution, build a decentralized defense and security network. Establish private Pan-African security units. Train in advanced guerrilla warfare, evasive tactics, and urban defense. We must start doing this. Develop decentralized military bases hidden in forests, mountains, and underground bunkers. As I say this, go look up capoeira. We've talked about it. Professor Nwari, I think, spoke about it when he was with us last. Look up capoeira, and you'll get the message that I'm sending to you without sending to you. Look up capoeira and figure out what you need to do with it as far as what Nduku is telling you today. Use drone warfare and AI-assisted defense systems to counter Western military invasion. They have drones coming to throw bombs. We create drones to counter that, to take down their drones, to send back their drones to them. Create biosurveillance units to test food and drinks for poison. Many African leaders have been assassinated. No African town, no African nation should accept aid from the West without testing what is in that aid. The blankets, the phones, whatever. It has to go through a test. Like, we need facilities on our continent if we're going to be accepting aid before we reestablish, if we're going to be accepting aid. It must be checked before it gets into the country. Train revolutionaries in anti-drone technology. That's what I was just saying. Economic warfare and resource control. Western powers use economic sabotage and debt traps to weaken revolutionary movements. Solution: establish an independent African economic and financial system. Create a Pan-African cryptocurrency. Those of you who are good at this, start volunteering towards this. Do not wait to get paid. We don't have the money to pay you, but we need your services. Form an African Development Bank, free from IMF and World Bank control. These solutions are not easy. These solutions will meet resistance from them. Please do not think that this is going to be a slide through to revolution or to liberation. All of this is going to be faced by all the problems I mentioned before. Nationalize Africa's natural resources and place them under Pan-African control, that no African nation can sell their resources individually. Decentralize Africa's food production system to prevent food dependency and sanctions. Create underground trade networks to ensure revolutionary movements are never economically strangled. Media control and narrative warfare. This is a big one. The Western media assassinated Gaddafi before NATO physically killed him. They've assassinated Lumumba, Sankara before they physically assassinated them. Why? But they assassinated their character, so that you saw them as bad people, so that when they were killed, it didn't matter to you. Build an African-owned global media empire. Create a Pan-African news network. That is what Kumbukeni is aspiring to be. That is what many other African media outlets are aspiring to be. Train independent African journalists. Use AI. And those of you who can support financially, you all the time, I hear people asking, how can I support financially? Send money to Kumbukeni. Don't just send money to Kumbukeni. Send experts to Kumbukeni to help us expand. I cannot do it by myself. I need advice. I need support to grow Kumbukeni. But it's one media outlet that can be expanded. If you have the resources to expand it, reach out. Help me, help us expand these media outlets. Use AI to track and expose Western propaganda. Mass produce. I've said again, AI is not a good thing, but it's also not a bad thing. Prompt it. Be very intentional about your prompt that you give the AI. If you're looking for Western propaganda, you can find out what it is and then counter it. And what AI does, it will come back with, and you can tell it to come back with the links where you can find this propaganda so that you know who it is that is putting out, the organizations that are putting out the propaganda. And then you, as an organization, as a media outlet, go to counter it. And maybe one of these days we'll do a broadcast where we're doing such. That's, you know what? I need to take my own advice. Kumbukeni is going to put out a broadcast where we will expose Western propaganda using AI so that we can show you how to do it. Mass produce pro-African documentaries, movies, and TV shows. Professor Nwari was here. I said to you all that he's producing films. I don't know if any of you have reached out to him to support. We need to mass produce, not just his company, more African companies that are producing pro-African documentaries. And movies and TVs showing. One of my colleagues, one of the comrades, I have 5 minutes to learn this, said that they don't think they've seen a movie or a show that shows a Black man and a Black woman in a healthy married relationship that is sexual as well in a healthy way. They don't think they've seen that. So if we're not seeing that, let's produce it. Madia, stop Madiaring all over the place. Produce something that is uplifting. With every one Madia, produce 5 things that are I'm not mentioning the specific names. You all don't think I know the name. I know the name. I'm just making a point. Produce 5 things that are lifting the Black community with every Madia that you put out. Develop a deep fake detection system to counter character assassinations through fake videos and audio. Number 6, infiltration and internal sabotage countermeasures. Again, the spook who sat by the door. Do I need to say more? If you don't know what that is, go look it up. If you don't know if you go look it up and you can't find it, ask Nduku, what is the spook who sat by the door? Infiltration and internal sabotage countermeasures. Number 7, legal and political defense mechanism. That one, I'm not going to get into the intricacies of that. That is something to be done behind closed doors. Legal and political defense mechanisms. Excuse me. Western-controlled courts and UN bodies are used to criminalize African revolutionaries. I have said to you all, I don't know why we keep going to the ICC. I don't know why we keep going to the UN. I don't know why we keep talking about we're going to go to court under this system. It is a system intentionally designed to keep you oppressed, subjugated, exploited, and at the bottom. To think that their system, their legal, so-called legal system is going to help you is to fool yourself. We must build our own legal systems. And then for those Africans who've told me that I am a criminal, I'm going against the law, you all best believe that is not my law. Like, this is the thing that we're talking about. This is a law that is built to oppress you. It is not your law. It is the law of the oppressor. How do you, as the oppressed, get yourself from oppression? By building your own system and having your own laws that are going to decide how you as a human being should be seen, how you as a human being should be treated, how you as a human being should be compensated if harm is done to you. We're in these courts talking about reparations, thinking that the oppressor is going to listen to us, right? We have to create our own courts where we can bring the case of reparations based on our own principles and our own, how we value our lives and our humanity. Because clearly they don't value us. They value the tortoise on the island more than they value our lives. Strengthen alliances with non-Western nations like China, Russia, and BRICS. This is something that must be done strategically. We understand China for what it is, right? It is not there to liberate Africa. So these relationships must be strategic. We are seeing Traore doing it right now. Develop legal defense teams specialized in defending African leaders from Western-backed legal attacks. Mass mobilization and revolutionary education. This is what we're doing. This is what we hope more people continue to do. Space and satellite defense strategy. This one I wanted to be very specific about. The West uses satellites for surveillance, drone strikes, and cyber warfare against African nations. The solution? We must launch an African space defense program. We must develop African-owned satellites. We must use electromagnetic pulse or whatever other technology to disable enemy surveillance systems. We must create AI-driven cyber warfare programs. We must counter whatever efforts that they're putting out to oppress, to subjugate, and to keep us, and to take over our motherland. This is all the time I have today. I thank you all. Again, I cannot do justice to the book in an hour, 15 minutes, and I have to go and support our sisters and our brother at Source of Knowledge. Yes. Have a blessed day. Kila Laheri. Thank you all for supporting us. Thank you all for following us. Again, the goal is to get this knowledge to as many Wana Ubuntu as possible. Share, share, share. Make sure many people watch it. Kila Laheri. Siku njema.